Catherine the Great, one of the most famous monarchs of the Russian Empire, once said, "Power without a nation's confidence is nothing." Few nations are more inhospitable than Russia. One of the largest empires in world history, the Russian Empire was matched in area only by the British and Mongol empires at their full height of expansion. The nation borders four seas: the Black Sea, Caspian Sea, Baltic Sea, and the White Sea. Three rivers, the Don, the Dnieper, and the Volga, connect the north and the south. The landmass is mostly comprised of frozen tundra, boreal forest, temperate forest, and steppe. Although the hostile environment of Russia makes it difficult to eke out a living, the cold has saved the country from invasion on more than one occasion.
The origins of modern Russia can be traced back to the late 9th and mid 13th century, when Russia was composed of the Kievan Rus, a medieval polity west of the Ural Mountains. Princes of different cities constantly vied for power over the small state, and wars struck the nation. Nevertheless, Russians had a chance to change their fate. In 1223, the Golden Horde of Mongols defeated the combined Russian and Turkic army and unified the Kievan Rus into one nation, beginning the time of subjugation known as the Mongol yoke. Alexander Nevsky, the Prince of Novgorod, persuaded some of his fellow princes to submit to the Mongols and connected Russia into trans-regional trade networks. As a result, the Mongols favored Novgorod and his new township of Moscow. These types of towns eventually surpassed Kiev as cultural, political, and economic centers. The Mongols never fully settled in the country, and they had little direct dealings with the inhabitants. The Golden Horde starved the Russian economy of precious metals, and their tax collecting was brutal. Yet even with these heavy charges, Russian territories consistently paid off the taxes, indicating that there was still some economic activity.
After the death of the Kublai Khan and the division of the Khanates, the Golden Horde's control over Russia began to wane. Tensions increased between the two groups, culminating in 1327, where the ambassador of the Golden Horde was trapped and burned alive during an uprising in the Grand Duchy of Tver. The Prince of Moscow, Ivan III, took power, declaring himself an autocratic ruler using the title Tsar. In the 16th century, a new great leader emerged, Ivan IV, Vasilievich, or Ivan the Terrible, son of Ivan III, rose to the throne. Ivan IV also began expansion into the east, annexing a large Muslim population and turning Russia into a multi-ethnic and multi-religious state. One of Moscow's most famous landmarks is a reminder of this drive to expand Russia's borders. St. Basil's Church on Red Square was built by Ivan's order in 1560 to commemorate Kazan's invasion and other key victories in the Tatar campaign.
16th century, Russians controlled the largest state in Europe. The government proclaimed it a hub of political and religious exchange. The Russian church told the idea that their principal city, Moscow, was the Third Rome. After the fall of Constantinople and Byzantine Empire in 1453, the Russian rulers even took the title Tsar from the Russian imperial title Caesar. However, many thought Russia's glorification was greatly exaggerated. The empire lacked connections to global trade in the 1600s, still possessed only one seaport, Arkhangelsk. Russia was blocked on all sides by the kingdoms of Sweden and Poland, Lithuania to the west, and the Crimean Turks to the south. Land trade was controlled by the Ottomans and the Safavid. The only passage of expansion was to Siberia. At the time, Siberia had an abundance of valuable natural resources, including the boreal forests, but mainly thickly furred animals. A Russian trading family known as Stroganovs pioneered expansion to Siberia by using advanced technology like rifles to destroy the indigenous Khaganate of Siberia in 1582. Russian fur trappers blazed a trail through the forests and even crossed over to Alaska in the 17th century.
During the early 1600s, Poland and Sweden occupied Moscow, ending the Russian rule of the Muscovites. This brief decentralized period was known as the Time of Troubles. Soon, Mikhail Romanov, the boyar aristocracy, took control in 1613. He consolidated the government's central authority, increasing the power of the Tsar. This rise in power proved to be detrimental to the lower class. Russia had almost no middle class, and the majority of the citizens were peasants. It was customary for the Tsar to award land to nobility, which the peasants would then tend. Peasants were required to change masters every 2 years to encourage the nobles to provide good treatment to the workers. In 1649, the law requiring master rotation was abolished and the peasants officially became serfs. Serfdom was hereditary, and although some serfs became artisans or factory workers, as commercial agriculture increased and the majority would spend their lives working the land.
Russian expansion incorporated many new ethnicities and religious ideals into the empire. The new peoples of the Russian Empire mainly held more rustic positions, such as herders, caravan workers, and soldiers, while the original Russians tended to be farmers, hunters, builders, scribes, and merchants. The diversity of the population could occasionally cause some conflict between the groups. The Russian Orthodox Church sent missionaries into Siberia to Christianize the people. However, Islam remained the dominant religion on the steppe. Governmental control was slow to follow the expansion into Siberia, often confined to widely spaced forts. This lack of supervision allowed a new class of soldier, the Cossacks, to develop between Muscovy and the Caspian and Black Sea. These warriors were known for their skill as cavalry, much as the Mongols were. They lived in tight-knit bands and were loyal first to their band leader and then to the crown. Cossacks made up most of the soldiers employed by the Stroganovs in Siberia and founded every major town in the region. In addition, they also gained significant political power when they defended Russia against Sweden and the Ottoman Empire. However, the Cossacks' relative independence still caused some problems for the government. In 1667, many of the Cossacks living in Ukraine rebelled after the Tsars attempted to split their land with Poland-Lithuania.
Russia's expansion into the Amur River Valley during the 1640s introduced trade with the Qing dynasty, but also brought the country into conflict with Mongolia. Both Russia and the Qing feared the Galdan Mongols, a nomadic power controlling the Eurasian steppe, so an agreement known as the Treaty of Nerchinsk was formed in 1689. It required Russian settlements east of Mongolia to withdraw, but allowed the western provinces to continue to prosper. Some believe that the power of the Romanovs reached its peak with Peter the Great. Born in Moscow, Russia, on June 9, 1672, Peter the Great was a Russian Tsar in the late 17th century who instituted extensive reforms in an attempt to establish Russia as a great nation. He created a strong navy, reorganized his army according to Western standards, secularized schools, administered greater control over the reactionary Orthodox Church, and introduced new administrative and territorial divisions of the country.
Peter the Great's influence on the Russian Empire proved to be the greatest in terms of making Russia a global power. His primary focus and achievements were in the expansion and modernization of Russia. In 1700, the country was still mostly rural, with only 3 out of every 100 people living in cities, and 2/3 of these people in Moscow. Peter saw westernization as an essential key to reform and modernize Russia. He expanded the empire and integrated Western languages and technologies into the empire, increasing trade and chances for technological advancements. Peter the Great instituted several reforms to education as seen in his decrees on compulsory education of the Russian nobility, where he said, in a primary source, all children between the ages of 10 and 15 of the nobility, of government clerks, and of lesser officials must be taught mathematics and some geometry. When they have mastered the material, they should then be given certificates. Without these certificates, they should not be allowed to marry nor receive certificates. Politically, Peter dramatically changed the structure of Russian government. He instituted several reforms, such as the military reform that created a navy and developed better weapons. He reduced the role of boyars in the military and government with appointed advisors in St. Petersburg. Boyars represented Russia's aristocracy from the times of the Kiev Rus. Prior to Peter's restrictions, boyars occupied the highest positions in armies and civil administration. He enlarged the role and power of the Tsar while building infrastructure and promoted industry throughout the empire, creating a lasting modernized Russia.
Catherine the Great expanded Russia's borders to the Black Sea and into Central Europe. She continued to advocate westernization and modernization in the empire. Catherine reigned from 1762 to 1796. She rose to the throne when she forced Peter III to abdicate the crown in 1762. Early in her reign, Catherine unsuccessfully attempted to reform Russia's legal system with the composition of the Instruction, for the purpose of replacing the mid-17th century Muscovite Code of Laws with modern law code, but loose delegates demolished the plan. She promoted education and thoughts of enlightenment among the elites through reforms such as the Instruction. Catherine herself belongs to a group of 18th century rulers who were influenced by the ideas of the Enlightenment to govern their own subject, known as the enlightened despot.
Catherine's major accomplishment during her reign was the expansion of Russia's borders. After abandoning her ideas of reform, Catherine sought imperial expansion. Previously, she expanded her political influence into Poland. Catherine's army extended the empire southwards and westwards, adding territories which included Crimea, Belarus, and Lithuania.
In the late 1700s, Russia was drawn into Napoleonic wars with France under Emperor Paul I. Russian troops drove the French from Italy, drawing Napoleon's attention. In 1812, he attempted to invade Russia with a force twice as large as the Russian standing army, but failed because of faulty logistics, disease, and lack of preparation for inclement weather. In 1825, Russia's reformation was set back slightly when high-ranking Russian officers participating in the Decembrist revolt tried to take control of the government after the death of Tsar Alexander. In 1853, Russia entered the Crimean War against the Ottomans after the Ottomans proclaimed France protectors of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The Russians invaded Ottoman territories in Romania, and the Ottomans allied themselves with Britain and France against the invasion. Russia was badly defeated and the government was... Civil unrest was brewing, and Alexander II did something unprecedented in Russia. He freed the serfs. As the people were allowed to travel, major cities grew at an incredible pace. St. Petersburg and Moscow finally became connected by railway in 1851. In 1890, Tsar Nicholas II inaugurated the Far East segment of the Trans-Siberian Railway, a transport line that was the longest railway in the world and took approximately 11 years to complete. It brought Siberia out of isolation and increased its agriculture and Russian trade. At the beginning of the new century, Russia went to war yet again, this time with Japan. Russia lost the war and therefore a strategic spot in Asia. This defeat brought civil unrest, leading to the Revolution of 1905. Throughout the year, there were strikes and protests all over Russia. The people wanted reform, so Nicholas made the first Russian parliament, the Duma, following the revolution. The people were still unsatisfied and desired an end of monarchical rule. Russia started to have internal conflicts with its provinces, like Ukraine and Poland, who wanted to secede from the empire. The final blow to the Russian Empire came in the form of World War I. The war was a drain on the people's land and the economy. Although Russia was declared victorious, the people finally revolted one last time against the monarchy, culminating in the execution of the Romanov family and the establishment of a provisional government, ending the great empire.